Preface: The Forgotten Pages of Olympus. In classical Greek mythology, Zeus is immortalized as the supreme god, the embodiment of justice, order, and absolute authority. His thunderbolts are said to maintain balance in the cosmos, and his rule over Olympus is often portrayed as both rightful and inevitable. Yet mythology, like history itself, is never a single, unbroken truth. It is a tapestry woven by victors, poets, and those who possess the power to decide which stories deserve to survive. Beyond the celebrated epics and heroic hymns lies a quieter realm of forgotten narratives, stories deliberately obscured, altered, or erased from collective memory. These lost accounts do not merely challenge Zeus's divinity. They challenge the very idea that absolute power can coexist with absolute truth. What if Olympus, beneath its radiant marble and eternal light, was built upon silenced voices and rewritten destinies? Ancient fragments, disputed interpretations, and shadowed oral traditions suggest that Zeus was not only a ruler, but also a curator of memory. Through myth and ritual, he shaped how the cosmos remembered the Titanomachy, the fall of the old gods, and the rise of a new divine order. Those who opposed him did not simply lose. They were transformed into monsters, villains, or cautionary tales. This preface invites the reader to step beyond official mythology and peer into the shadows it avoids, not to destroy the image of Zeus, but to understand him more fully, as a god of thunder, yes, but also of silence, fear, and carefully guarded truths. Part 1. Zeus, the author of his own history. According to official Greek mythology, Zeus is remembered as the great liberator, the god who overthrew the Titans, freed the cosmos from tyranny, and established an era of divine order under Olympian rule. This narrative, repeated through epics, hymns, and temple inscriptions, presents Zeus as both hero and lawgiver, a necessary force of balance against the chaos of primordial gods. Yet beneath this polished mythology lies a more troubling possibility, that Zeus did not merely inherit history, he rewrote it. History, whether human or divine, is rarely shaped by truth alone. It is shaped by survival, dominance, and control over memory. Zeus, having emerged victorious from the Titanomachy, possessed not only unmatched power but something far more influential, the authority to define what the war meant, who the villains were, and why his rule was inevitable. In this sense, Zeus was not just a conqueror of the old gods, but the architect of a new historical narrative. The Titanomachy, liberation or replacement. In the traditional account, the Titanomachy is framed as a righteous rebellion. Cronus, the devourer of his own children, embodies fear, stagnation, and cruelty. Zeus rises as the savior, freeing his siblings and restoring cosmic justice. However, several lesser-known fragments, some real, some speculative, others reconstructed through philosophical interpretation, suggest that the Titans were not a unified force of evil. Certain Titans represented concepts that threatened centralized authority: mnemosyne, memory; Themis, divine law; and even Prometheus, foresight and rebellion. These figures, in alternative interpretations, did not oppose Zeus out of malice, but out of resistance to absolute rule. Their defeat, therefore, was not merely a military victory, it was an ideological purge. In post-war Olympus, Titans who could not be assimilated were cast into Tartarus and later remembered as monsters, traitors, or forces of chaos. The narrative was simplified: Titans bad, Olympians good. Complexity was sacrificed for stability. By controlling the story of the war, Zeus ensured that no future god would question whether the old order had any virtues worth remembering. The erasure of dissent. Power does not only silence enemies through force, it silences them through omission. One of the most unsettling aspects of Zeus's rule is not whom he punished, but whom history forgot. Several divine figures appear briefly in early myths, only to vanish without explanation. Scholars and modern mythographers have long debated these disappearances, but a darker interpretation suggests intentional erasure. In fictionalized oral traditions, Zeus is said to have convened secret councils following the Titanomachy, assemblies where surviving deities were required to swear loyalty to Olympus. Those who refused were not always destroyed. Some were absorbed into abstract concepts, others demoted to minor spirits, their identities fragmented until they no longer posed a threat. To be forgotten, in the divine realm, was a fate worse than death. Mortals worshipped names they knew. Gods without stories lost relevance, power, and eventually existence. Zeus understood this intimately. By monopolizing worship and myth, he ensured that remembrance itself became a weapon. Myth as a tool of governance. Zeus ruled not only through thunderbolts, but through storytelling. Myths were the laws of the ancient world, moral frameworks disguised as divine tales. By shaping these myths, Zeus defined what obedience looked like and what rebellion cost. Stories of mortals who defied Zeus almost always end in tragedy. Prometheus chained, Sisyphus condemned, Tantalus eternally punished. These myths functioned as warnings, reinforcing the idea that challenging divine authority was not heroic, but foolish. Rarely do these tales explore the motives of the punished. Their voices are secondary to the lesson imposed. In this light, Zeus becomes less a god of justice and more a god of precedent. Justice, under his rule, is not impartial, it is consistent. And consistency, when wielded by absolute power, becomes indistinguishable from inevitability. The control of memory and time. Among the most revealing myths is Zeus's relationship with Mnemosyne, the Titaness of memory. From their union came the Muses, patrons of art, history, and poetry. Symbolically, this is profound. Memory itself submits to Zeus, giving birth to narratives that glorify his reign. Some speculative traditions suggest this was no coincidence. By aligning himself with memory, Zeus ensured that history would sing his praises. Poets inspired by the Muses were, knowingly or not, participants in the reinforcement of Olympian ideology. Their songs immortalized Zeus not as a ruler with flaws, but as a cosmic necessity. Even time bowed to Zeus's authority. Kronos, the embodiment of time, was defeated and imprisoned. Whether literal or symbolic, this act represents the severing of cyclical history. Under Zeus, time no longer devours its children. Instead, it stagnates under eternal rule, unchanging, unquestioned. Victory as moral authority. Perhaps the most dangerous myth Zeus perpetuated was the idea that victory itself equals righteousness. By winning the cosmic war, Zeus inherited moral legitimacy. His actions, no matter how cruel or contradictory, were justified by the simple fact that he stood at the top. This logic mirrors that of many empires throughout human history. Those who write history rarely ask whether their rule is just, they ask only whether it is stable. Zeus's Olympus, shining and orderly, may therefore represent not moral perfection, but the final stage of successful domination. The gods beneath him obeyed not because Zeus was flawless, but because resistance had been proven futile. Over time, obedience became tradition, and tradition became truth. A god who feared being remembered differently. Ironically, Zeus's obsession with controlling history may reveal his greatest fear, not rebellion, but reinterpretation. A future where the Titanomachy is re-examined. Where Prometheus is seen as a martyr rather than a criminal. Where Cronus is remembered not only as a tyrant, but as a ruler who feared replacement. Zeus understood that myths evolve. Each retelling carries the risk of exposure. And so he did what all absolute rulers do. He anchored his legacy in sacred texts, rituals, and fear. But cracks remain. In the silences between myths, in the unanswered questions, in the gods who vanish without explanation, there are hints of a history that refuses to stay buried. A version of Olympus where Zeus is not merely a hero, but a master editor of reality itself. Conclusion of Part 1. Zeus did not simply rule the cosmos. He defined how the cosmos would remember being ruled. Through force, fear, and narrative control, he transformed victory into virtue and dominance into destiny. Whether he was a necessary stabilizer or the first divine autocrat remains unresolved. But one truth emerges clearly. The thunderbolt that secured Zeus's throne was only half his power. The other half was the story told afterward. And history, once written by a god, is the hardest thing of all to challenge. Part 2. The affairs misnamed as love. In official Greek mythology, Zeus's countless romantic encounters are often portrayed as expressions of divine passion, playful, seductive, and sometimes tragic, but rarely condemned. These stories are retold as tales of desire between gods and mortals, framed as inevitable consequences of Zeus's overwhelming charisma and godly nature. Yet when examined beyond poetic tradition, a darker interpretation emerges. What if these encounters were not love stories at all, but exercises of unchecked power? What if mythology softened their language not to preserve romance, but to protect authority? To call these relationships affairs is already an act of mythological generosity. In many cases, they more closely resemble coercion disguised as destiny. Zeus, as the supreme god, existed in a realm where consent was structurally impossible for those beneath him. Mortals could not refuse a god without risking annihilation, and even lesser deities were bound by divine hierarchy. In such a world, desire itself becomes weaponized. Power imbalance as divine normalcy. One of the most unsettling features of Zeus's romantic mythology is how normalized extreme power imbalance becomes. Zeus approaches mortal women not as an equal, but as a force of nature, arriving as a swan, a bull, a golden rain, or a sudden storm. These transformations are traditionally interpreted as symbols of seduction or divine creativity. Yet from another perspective, they represent the erasure of agency. To be confronted by a god in disguise is to be denied informed choice. The mortal does not know whom she is dealing with until it is too late. By the time Zeus reveals himself, the encounter has already been framed as fate. Myth thus reframes violation as inevitability, absolving the god while sanctifying the outcome. In this framework, love is not mutual affection. It is submission to overwhelming force. Silenced voices of mortal women. Perhaps the most striking omission in Zeus's romantic myths is the absence of female perspective. We hear of Europa's beauty, Leda's astonishment, Danae's isolation, but rarely their consent. Their emotional responses are condensed into single lines, if mentioned at all. The narrative moves swiftly from encounter to consequence, focusing not on trauma, but on offspring. Children born from these unions, heroes, kings, demigods, become the justification for the act itself. Their greatness retroactively sanctifies the violence that preceded them. The woman's suffering becomes irrelevant once a hero emerges. In mythological logic, outcome outweighs experience. Some speculative traditions imagine that these women did speak, but their voices were not preserved. Oral stories passed among mortal women may have told a different version, one of fear, confusion, and divine intrusion. But such stories lacked temples, bards, and patron gods to protect them. They faded, replaced by hymns praising Zeus's virility and generosity. Hera, the miscast villain. No figure suffers more from narrative distortion than Hera. In official mythology, she is portrayed as jealous, vindictive, and cruel, punishing Zeus's lovers and children rather than confronting Zeus himself. This portrayal conveniently shifts moral blame away from the supreme god and onto the wronged wife. Yet this framing ignores a crucial reality. Hera could not challenge Zeus directly without destabilizing Olympus. Her power, though immense, was still subordinate. Her acts of vengeance may therefore be interpreted not as cruelty, but as displaced resistance, misdirected anger in a system where confronting the source of harm was impossible. Some fictionalized interpretations suggest Hera was acutely aware of how mythology would judge her. By allowing herself to be cast as the villain, she preserved Olympus's fragile order while silently absorbing its moral cost. In doing so, she became a scapegoat for Zeus's excesses, her rage immortalized, her pain trivialized. Divine consent and the illusion of choice. Even among goddesses, Zeus's romantic dominance raises troubling questions. His relationship with Métis, for example, ends with her being swallowed whole, an act justified by prophecy and fear of overthrow. Love, in this case, becomes indistinguishable from preemptive violence. Similarly, Zeus's pursuit of goddesses often ends in transformation, imprisonment, or absorption into Olympian structure. What appears as union is frequently erasure. The goddess remains, but her autonomy does not. These stories suggest that within Olympus itself, consent was conditional, granted only when it aligned with Zeus's security. Love that threatened power was eliminated. Love that reinforced hierarchy was celebrated. Myth as moral disguise. By framing coercion as romance, Mythology performs a subtle act of moral laundering. Zeus is not depicted as a predator, but as a lover. His victims are not traumatized, but honored by divine attention. This narrative serves a clear function. It preserves the image of Zeus as a benevolent ruler while normalizing domination. This pattern mirrors real-world systems of power, where abuse is reframed as privilege and resistance as ingratitude. Mythology thus becomes not just storytelling, but ideological training, teaching mortals to accept inequality as divine will. The repetition of these stories reinforces the lesson. To be chosen by power is a blessing, regardless of the cost. The children who inherit the silence. The demigod children of Zeus occupy a strange moral space. Celebrated as heroes, they are living proof of Zeus's reach across worlds. Yet their very existence depends on the silencing of their mothers. Many of these heroes suffer deeply, abandoned, hunted, or cursed from birth. Heracles is driven mad. Perseus grows up in exile. Dionysus is torn from his mother's womb. Their suffering may be read as echoes of the injustice that created them. In some interpretations, these heroes unconsciously carry the unresolved trauma of divine coercion. Their violence, instability, and isolation are not flaws, but symptoms of a system that confuses power with love, rewriting love in a world of gods. If we strip away poetic language and divine justification, Zeus's romantic mythology becomes a study in unchecked authority. Love is not an exchange, but an imposition. Desire flows in one direction. Refusal is unthinkable. This does not diminish Zeus's complexity, it deepens it. He becomes not merely a flawed god, but a reflection of a world where power defines morality. His relationships reveal Olympus not as a paradise, but as a hierarchy sustained by silence. Conclusion of Part 2. The affairs of Zeus were not misunderstood romances. They were carefully named illusions. By calling them love, mythology protected power from scrutiny and transformed domination into destiny. The true tragedy lies not only in what Zeus did, but in how thoroughly the system ensured it would never be questioned. In the end, these stories ask an uncomfortable question. If love cannot exist without consent, then what was truly divine about Zeus's desire? Perhaps the most radical act is not to condemn Zeus outright, but to listen to the women whose voices were lost, to the silences between verses, and to the myths that tremble when reread through human eyes. Because when power defines love, silence becomes sacred, and that may be the darkest myth of all. Part 3. Zeus and the Fear of Overthrow. At the height of his power, Zeus appears invincible. He rules the sky, commands thunder and lightning, presides over Olympus, and enforces cosmic order. No god openly challenges him. No titan rises again. The universe, at least on the surface, seems stable. Yet beneath this apparent permanence lies a persistent and corrosive fear, the fear of being overthrown. This fear is not incidental. It is foundational. Zeus's authority is born from rebellion. He did not inherit the cosmos peacefully. He seized it by force from his father, Cronus. And because his rise mirrors Cronus's fall, Zeus understands something few rulers ever admit. Power gained through overthrow carries within it the certainty of repetition. What has happened once can happen again. Thus, Zeus's reign is not merely about ruling the present. It is about preventing the future. The curse of the successor. The defining trauma of Zeus's existence is inheritance itself. Cronus devoured his children out of fear that one would replace him, fulfilling a prophecy he could not escape. Zeus survived, rebelled, and fulfilled that prophecy. In doing so, he did not break the cycle, he completed it. Official mythology portrays Zeus as wiser than his father, a ruler who learned from Cronus's mistakes. But learning does not always lead to transcendence. Sometimes it leads to refinement. Where Cronus used brute violence, Zeus used foresight, strategy, and narrative control. Where Cronus swallowed his children, Zeus swallowed Métis. The act is often explained as cleverness, a necessary step to prevent a dangerous prophecy. But stripped of poetic justification, it is a chilling repetition, the elimination of a future threat before it can speak. Athena's later birth, from Zeus's own head, is framed as miraculous. Yet it also symbolizes a closed system of power, wisdom, war, and governance are born from Zeus alone. No independent lineage remains. Métis and the fear of thought. Métis, the Titaness of wisdom and cunning, represents more than a prophetic danger. She embodies strategic intelligence, the kind that does not rely on force. Zeus's decision to consume her is often interpreted as a preventive act against a foretold son greater than his father. But another interpretation is possible. Zeus did not fear a child. He feared thought that could rival his own. By absorbing Métis, Zeus internalized wisdom while destroying its autonomy. From that point on, intelligence exists only as an extension of Zeus's will. Athena, though formidable, never challenges his authority. She advises, strategizes, and executes, but always within the framework of Olympian hierarchy. This act reveals a crucial aspect of Zeus's psychology. He does not merely fear physical rebellion. He fears conceptual alternatives, ways of thinking about power that do not place him at the center. The surveillance of Olympus. Unlike the chaotic reign of the Titans, Zeus's Olympus is orderly, structured, and deeply monitored. Gods have domains, responsibilities, and boundaries. On the surface, this appears to be governance. Beneath it, it functions as containment. Every god is powerful, but none are whole. Poseidon controls the sea, but not the sky. Hades rules the dead, but is isolated from Olympus. Ares embodies violence, but lacks strategy. Apollo sees the future, but does not rule it. Each god is given power, but never enough to threaten the throne. This fragmentation is intentional. Zeus does not centralize power by hoarding it. He distributes it strategically, ensuring dependence. Olympus becomes a network of controlled competencies, all requiring Zeus's coordination. Even rebellion, when it occurs, is limited. The myth of Hera, Athena, and Poseidon conspiring to overthrow Zeus ends not with revolution, but humiliation. Zeus escapes, punishes, and restores order. The lesson is clear. Dissent is possible, but futile. Law is a weapon against fate. Zeus is often called the god of justice, but justice under Zeus is not neutral. It is preventive. His laws are not merely responses to wrongdoing. They are mechanisms designed to suppress the emergence of threats. Prophecies, in particular, terrify Zeus. Unlike enemies, they cannot be struck by lightning. They exist outside time, immune to force. Zeus's response is to control or eliminate those who speak them. Oracles are bound by ritual. Seers are cursed with disbelief. Prophets are punished for clarity. The future, under Zeus's reign, is not abolished, but it is blurred. By destabilizing prophecy, Zeus turns fate into noise. Nothing is clear enough to act upon. In this ambiguity, his rule survives. The punishment of Prometheus, a warning to the future. No myth better illustrates Zeus's fear of overthrow than the punishment of Prometheus. Officially, Prometheus is punished for stealing fire and deceiving Zeus. But fire is not merely a tool, it is a symbol of autonomy. Fire allows mortals to build, create, and eventually question gods. Prometheus does not threaten Zeus with armies. He threatens him with progress. Zeus's response is not proportionate, it is exemplary. Eternal punishment, publicly displayed, serves as a warning across time. This is not justice. It is deterrence. Prometheus becomes a living message. Foresight leads to suffering. Rebellion leads to eternity in chains. And yet, paradoxically, the myth preserves Prometheus's defiance. Zeus cannot erase him completely. In punishing Prometheus, Zeus reveals the limits of his control. The gods who disappear. Perhaps the most unsettling evidence of Zeus's fear lies not in punishment, but in absence. Certain divine figures vanish from mythology without explanation. Minor gods fade. Titans are forgotten. Spirits dissolve into abstraction. These disappearances suggest a quieter method of control, erasure. A god without worship ceases to matter. A myth untold loses power. Zeus does not need to kill every threat. He only needs to ensure it is no longer remembered. In this way, Zeus governs not just the present, but memory itself. What is forgotten cannot return. Eternal rule as stagnation. Zeus's ultimate triumph is stability. But stability, when prolonged indefinitely, becomes stagnation. Olympus does not evolve. Power does not rotate. There is no succession plan, only prevention. Unlike human kings, Zeus cannot die. And so, the problem of succession becomes infinite. His fear does not end, it compounds. Every generation that passes without challenge reinforces the myth of inevitability. Zeus becomes less a ruler and more a condition of existence. To imagine a world without Zeus becomes impossible. And yet, that impossibility is itself a weakness. Systems that cannot imagine their end are unprepared for it. The paradox of absolute power. Zeus's greatest strength is also his greatest vulnerability. Absolute power requires absolute vigilance. There can be no rest, no trust, no true intimacy. Every ally is a potential successor. Every child is a possible prophecy. In this sense, Zeus is profoundly alone. He sits atop Olympus not as a king among peers, but as a singularity. All relationships are vertical. Love becomes risky. Trust becomes impossible. Fear becomes policy. Zeus rules forever, but never peacefully. Rebellion as an idea, not an event. Perhaps the most radical interpretation of Zeus's fear is that rebellion has already occurred, not in war, but in thought. Each retelling of myth that questions Zeus's morality is a quiet insurrection. Each reinterpretation that sympathizes with titans, women, or punished figures destabilizes the official narrative. Zeus cannot strike down interpretation. The more absolute his power becomes, the more fragile his story grows. And stories, unlike gods, do not obey. Conclusion of Part 3. Zeus's fear of overthrow is not a weakness. It is the engine of his rule. It shapes his laws, his relationships, and his mythology. He is not merely a god who fears losing power. He is a god who understands that power is temporary, even when eternal. In trying to prevent the future, Zeus freezes it. In trying to silence fate, he amplifies it. His reign becomes a monument to control and a warning about its cost. The tragedy of Zeus is not that he is cruel or unjust or flawed. It is that he is aware. Aware that no throne is truly eternal. Aware that history repeats. Aware that one day, someone will read the myths differently. And that reinterpretation, not rebellion, may finally be what brings Olympus to an end. Because when a god must control the future to survive the present, the end has already begun. Conclusion. Hidden truths do not weaken Zeus. The stories concealed by official mythology do not diminish Zeus. They transform him. They strip away the simplicity of divine perfection and reveal something far more enduring, a ruler shaped by power, fear, and contradiction. Zeus does not become weaker when examined closely. On the contrary, he becomes more formidable because he becomes more real. To acknowledge the hidden truths of Olympus is not to dethrone Zeus, but to understand the nature of absolute authority. Zeus is not merely the god of thunder. He is the embodiment of dominance sustained over time. His strength lies not only in lightning and law, but in narrative control, memory, and silence. These are the tools that allow power to survive long after force alone would fail. By confronting the stories that were softened, renamed, or erased, we are not condemning Zeus. We are questioning the system that required such erasure in the first place. The suppressed voices, the distorted loves, and the vanished gods do not weaken Olympus. They expose its foundations. And foundations, once seen, can no longer pretend to be eternal truths. In the end, Zeus remains supreme not because he is morally flawless, but because he is structurally invincible, at least within the world he designed. Yet even this invincibility has limits. Myths evolve. Interpretations shift. What was once unquestionable becomes debatable. The greatest threat to absolute power is not rebellion, but understanding. And as long as these hidden stories continue to be told, Zeus will endure, not as an untouchable idol, but as a timeless warning that every throne, even a divine one, stands upon truths it cannot fully erase.
Zeus vs. Hades Part Woodward Siari. Thunder on Olympus. When the king of the sky faces the lord of death. Two forms of power. One forbidden question. In Greek mythology, there is a question rarely spoken aloud, not because it is difficult, but because it is dangerous. Who is stronger, Zeus or Hades? Zeus, king of the gods, wielder of thunder, the one who overthrew the Titans, ruler of the sky and the divine order. Hades, the one who dwells in shadow, without a shining throne, without glorious temples, yet every living being ultimately belongs to him. One rules life in motion, the other rules eternal stillness. Zeus is worshipped through oaths, Hades is feared through instinct. And while Olympus has always believed Zeus to be the strongest, a quiet truth has existed since the universe was divided into three realms. Zeus has never ventured deep into the underworld. Not because of laws, not because of agreements, but because there are places where thunder is no longer the ultimate weapon. I, Zeus, the power of the victor. Zeus was not born the strongest god. He became the strongest because he won. One, the god who overthrew his father. Zeus is the only Olympian who defeated his own father. Kronos triumphed over the Titans. An older, more primal generation of gods survived a 10-year war that shook the cosmos itself. Zeus's lightning is more than a weapon. It is a symbol of judgment. When Zeus strikes, he does not merely destroy, he passes sentence. 2. The power of visibility. Zeus rules from the sky. Everyone sees him. Every god hears the thunder. His power lies in presence, overwhelming force, psychological dominance. Olympus exists because Zeus allows it to exist, but this creates a deadly paradox. Zeus's power depends on others recognizing him as king, and that is something Hades has never needed. Second, Hades, the power of the one who never needed to win. Hades never fought for the throne, not because he was weak, but because he chose the only domain that could never be taken from him. 1. Hades does not rule death, he owns it. A common misconception. Hades is not the god of death. He is the owner of death. Thanatos carries souls away, but Hades decides where those souls remain, or whether they are imprisoned forever. No being, not even Zeus, can escape that fate. 2. Power that requires no display. Hades does not need worshippers, temples. Prayers, he has time. Every battle Zeus wins, every empire that collapses, every god that fades into obscurity, only makes Hades's realm larger. Zeus rules while the world lives. Hades rules when everything ends. 3. The first moment of Zeus's doubt. Olympus had never questioned Zeus's power, until the day souls refused to move on. Spirits wandered. Death was delayed. The balance of the universe fractured. And Zeus realized something terrifying. Something was happening in Hades's domain that he could not control. Hera warned him. Athena analyzed it. Apollo remained silent. But Zeus, with the instinct of a ruler, did the only thing he knew. He decided to cross the boundary of the underworld himself. 4. When thunder meets shadow. For the first time in history, the sky did not answer Zeus. Lightning weakened as he descended. Light was swallowed whole. Thunder fell silent. There was no battlefield, no armies, only the stillness of death. And at its center, Hades was waiting. No anger, no challenge, just a single sentence, colder than fear itself. Do you bring thunder into a realm where nothing living remains to fear it, Zeus? V. The confrontation. Never recorded. Zeus hurled lightning. The ground split apart. But the underworld was unharmed. Hades did not strike back. He merely gestured. And Zeus saw heroes. He once blessed kings who swore loyalty to Olympus mortals, who died for ideals Zeus himself had granted all of them, standing behind Hades's throne. Every choice you make, Hades said, ends here. For the first time, Zeus understood. His power creates death. Hades's power possesses it. Ending of Part 1. The Fear. Zeus never admits Zeus withdrew, not defeated, but not victorious. Olympus still stood. Yet from that moment on, Zeus never again looked upon the underworld as a lesser realm. And the ancient Greeks acknowledged this truth without ever saying it aloud. They swore by Zeus's name, but they never spoke Hades's name lightly. Part 2. The Underworld Awakens. When Death Stops Waiting. Opening. The war that does not begin with thunder. Wars usually begin with fire, with lightning, with screams. This one did not. It began with silence. After Zeus returned from the underworld, Olympus pretended nothing had happened. The gods resumed their feasts. Mortals continued their prayers. But something fundamental had shifted. Zeus no longer threw lightning casually. The sky hesitated before answering him, and for the first time since the Titan War, Olympus was afraid of something it could not see. Because the most dangerous truth was no longer hidden, Hades had not fought back, and that meant he was choosing the timing. When death stops, obeying it started subtly, not with gods, not with kings, but with ordinary deaths. Men fell in battle and did not arrive in the underworld. Victims of plagues lingered between breath and silence. Souls hovered at the edge of existence, unable to cross. Thanatos himself became restless. He still harvested souls, but the gates did not open. For the first time since the dawn of time, the underworld was not receiving what was promised, and Olympus realized the unthinkable. Hades was withholding death. Chut the panic of the gods. Athena was the first to understand the implication. Death was not merely an ending, it was a mechanism. Without death, war lost its meaning, sacrifice lost its weight, immortality became meaningless. Ares raged. "Let me march into the underworld," he demanded. "Let steel answer shadow." Athena stopped him with a single sentence. "You cannot kill what governs death." Apollo fell silent when his prophecies stopped resolving. The future no longer moved forward. It looped. Even Hera began to fear something she had never feared before. A king who no longer controlled consequences. Third, Zeus's first mistake. Zeus did what kings always do when power slips. He asserted it. He summoned the Moirai, the fates themselves. Clotho, Lachesis, Atropos. "Why has death slowed?" Zeus demanded. "Why does the world hesitate to end?" The fates did not bow. They did not answer directly. Atropos, she who cuts the thread, said only this: "Because the one who keeps the ledger has closed the book." Zeus understood immediately. This was not rebellion. This was accounting. Hades was reminding Olympus of something it had chosen to forget. Every god's power has a cost, and every cost is paid in death. 4. The underworld moves. Then it happened. The rivers of the underworld surged. Styx overflowed its banks. Lethe leaked forgetfulness into the dreams of gods. Souls pressed against the borders of reality. But still, Hades did not march. He did not invade. He expanded. The dead did not rise to attack Olympus. They whispered. They whispered to oracles, to madmen, to kings on their thrones at night. They whispered a single truth. The gods are not eternal. They are merely late. The realm Zeus cannot strike. Zeus gathered the gods. "Enough," he declared. "If Hades withholds death, I will take his realm from him." Lightning split the heavens as Olympus descended toward the chasm. And once again, Zeus made the same mistake. He believed power travels everywhere. The underworld did not resist. It absorbed. Lightning struck and vanished. Thunder roared and died, because the underworld was not a place. It was a state of being. You cannot conquer death. You can only arrive in it. And that was when Hades finally spoke to Zeus again. Not in anger, not in challenge, but in correction. "You rule because they fear losing what they have," Hades said. "I rule because everything they have eventually becomes mine. 6. The most dangerous realization. Zeus raised his thunderbolt, and for the first time he hesitated. Because he understood what striking Hades would mean. If Hades fell, who would receive the dead? If death lost its master, what would existence become? Endless suffering, endless decay, immortality as a curse. Hades was not Olympus's enemy. He was its foundation. And foundations do not threaten towers. They simply outlast them. Ending of Part 2. The balance breaks, Zeus withdrew again. This time, not in defiance, but in calculation. Olympus still stood. The underworld still waited. But something irreversible had happened. Zeus had realized he could not destroy Hades without destroying the universe that made Zeus king. And Hades had proven something even more terrifying. He did not need to win. He only needed to stop cooperating.